That beggar didn't even pay for the cake. Eat this, vagrant! The mother-in-law screamed at our wedding and smeared a piece of cake on my face. My husband and the guests laughed. I quietly wiped myself off, calmly took the microphone and said just one sentence. After that, the mother-in-law fainted and the groom turned pale. Amelia gently arranged the snow-white tablecloth on the table in a small, cozy cafe in the heart of Boston. Opposite her, Robert, her fiancé, was looking at her with admiration. His brown eyes shone with love, and on his lips was the same smile that had made her heart skip a beat 6 months ago. They were discussing the details of the upcoming wedding, and Amy felt like the heroine of a fairy tale. She, a simple girl raised by her uncle, was marrying the heir to one of the city's most famous construction companies. Amelia, are you sure you want lilies? Maybe roses would be better. They're more elegant. Robert carefully touched her hand. I like lilies, she smiled softly. They are so delicate and real. Whatever you want, my love, anything for you. Their romance had been quick and beautiful. He, the son of Charles Brown, the owner of a company called Strahan Construction, and she, a talented landscape designer. They met on one of his projects, where Amy was designing the garden for a new residential complex. He was captivated by her modesty, intelligence, and the quiet strength he sensed in her every gesture. She fell in love with his attention, his thoughtful gestures, and the effortless way he seemed to live life. But the fairy tale began to show its first cracks when Robert decided to introduce her to his parents. The Browns lived in a huge country house that looked like a palace with columns, marble floors, and servants. Amy, who arrived with a simple bouquet and a box of good chocolates, immediately felt like an outsider. Selina, her future mother-in-law, a tall, impeccably dressed blonde in a silk dress, looked her up and down with an appraising gaze that made her squirm. Landscape designer, she repeated with ill-concealed disdain upon hearing Amy's profession. That's something like a gardener, isn't it? Not exactly, Amy tried to explain. I create projects. I work with the architecture of the space. Oh, of course, Selina interrupted. And what do your parents do, Amelia? Amy shrank inside. That was the most painful question. I grew up without parents. My uncle, Marcus Wright, raised me. An uncle? The mother-in-law's eyebrows rose. And what does your uncle do? I hope he has a decent business. He has his own construction company, a small one, Amy replied, as her uncle had asked her to. Well, something is something. Selina nodded condescendingly and immediately lost all interest in her. Charles, a large authoritarian man with a hard look, didn't even give her more than a brief nod. That night, Amy felt like she was under a microscope. Every gesture, every word was evaluated and weighed. She realized that in that world of luxury and snobbery, there was no place for her, an orphan raised by a foreman uncle. When Robert proposed to her a month later, despite his parents' evident disapproval, she was on cloud 9. She decided that love would conquer everything and that over time the Browns would accept her, but she was cruelly mistaken. The conversation about the wedding took place a week after the engagement at that same house. My husband and I have discussed your decision, Selina began in an official tone while Robert looked guiltily at his plate. We are not going to interfere. After all, Robert is a grown man now. She paused, enjoying the effect. We are not going to finance this social misstep, not 1 cent. Consider this your first test of independence. If you want to get married, do it with your own money. Amy's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a rejection of help, it was a public humiliation. Mum, why are you doing this? Robert mumbled. I'm telling the truth, Selina snapped. Let your fiancé show what she is capable of. Perhaps her builder uncle will spend something on a good party for his dear niece. Although judging by his modest appearance, I doubt he has much money. Charles supported his wife with a quiet, approving snort. Amy sat staring at her plate, feeling tears welling up in her throat. She had expected coldness, but not such open cruelty. She looked at Robert for support, but he only shrugged helplessly as if to say, What can I do? They are my parents. That night, returning home in a taxi, Amy thought for the first time that she was making a mistake. But her love for Robert and her naive faith in the best outweighed that feeling. She decided she could handle it. She would prove to them that she was worthy of their son. She still didn't know that that dinner was only the first act of a long play of humiliations that her future mother-in-law had already begun to stage, and that the final scene, the cruelest of all, would take place at her own wedding in front of hundreds of guests. The first signal sounded loud and clear. Upon returning to the cosy two-bedroom apartment on the avenue that her uncle had gifted her after college, Amy gave in to tears. She cried from pain, from humiliation, and from helplessness. Robert tried to comfort her. He said that with time his parents would soften, that what was important was their love, but his words sounded unconvincing and false. He hadn't defended her. He hadn't put his mother in her place, and that's what hurt her the most. The next day, with red eyes from crying, she went to see her uncle. Marcus lived in a quiet downtown area in a classic high-ceilinged building. He greeted her at the door, and his kind, perceptive eyes understood everything immediately. He silently led her to the kitchen, made her favorite herbal tea, and sat across from her, ready to listen. Amy told him everything: the cold welcome, Selina's taunts, the humiliating rejection of help for the wedding. Her uncle listened without interrupting, only his lips tightened, and his eyes acquired a steely glint. When she finished, he took her hand. "Amy, my niece, did you really think I would let some social climbers hurt you?" "Uncle Marcus, that's just how they are. They consider me nobody," she sobbed. "That's what they think," he replied calmly. "Now listen to me. You are going to have a wedding, and it will be one that will make all of Boston gasp. The best restaurant, the best musicians, the most beautiful dress. I'll pay for everything." "But they'll ask where we got the money. They'll think we've gone into debt. They'll despise us even more." "That's the most fun part." A shrewd glint crossed her uncle's eyes. "We won't tell them anything. To all their questions, you answer that it's a gift from me, and you introduce me, as always, the owner of a small construction company, Wright Construction. Let them think whatever they want. You'll see how they sing a different tune when the time comes." Amy didn't fully understand his plan, but she trusted her uncle completely. He had been a father and mother to her, and always knew what was best. His calm confidence was contagious. The wedding preparations began, and it was a preparation for a truly grand event. Her uncle hired the city's best wedding agency. For the celebration, they chose the most prestigious country club, Emerald Grove, with a huge banquet hall, a terrace with a lake view, and its own park. The decorators proposed a fairy tale garden concept, with thousands of fresh flowers, crystal chandeliers, and silk drapes. They invited nationally famous cover bands and a popular host. When Robert saw the budget that Amy had accidentally left on the table, his eyes widened. "Amelia, this is a fortune. It costs as much as an apartment." "My uncle said that he wouldn't spare any expense for his dear niece," Amy replied calmly, just as her uncle had instructed her. "He's been saving a lot, but this is crazy." Robert nervously rubbed his chin. "When my parents find out, and what about your parents?" Amy looked at him intently. "They themselves said we should handle the wedding. Well, here we are handling it." The Browns were genuinely shocked. Selina, upon learning of the chosen venue, even called Amy. "Amy, darling," her voice was sweet as honey mixed with poison. "I heard you chose Emerald Grove. Are you sure you can afford it? The banquet alone per person costs—" "We've got it, Selina," Amy replied politely. "My uncle is handling everything." "Ah, the uncle," the mother-in-law sighed. "How generous of your uncle. I hope he hasn't sold his last apartment for this, because it would be terrible if he came to live with you after the wedding." Amy gritted her teeth and remained silent. The Browns' contempt grew every day. They couldn't understand where these poor people were getting all this money. Their only explanation was that the uncle was involved in criminal activities or was hopelessly in debt. They imagined how after the extravagant wedding, debt collectors would arrive for Amy and Robert, and then they could tell their son, "We warned you," with good reason. Robert was caught between two fires. On one hand, he was flattered by the magnitude of the upcoming event. His friends were already envious. "You're going to have the wedding of the year." But on the other, he was tormented by doubts and his parents' constant recriminations. "Robert, do you understand that you're getting involved with suspicious people?" his father Charles said to him one evening after the security department had looked into Marcus Wright's company. "He only has 3 vans and an old excavator to his name. Where does he get millions for your wedding? He's going to get you into trouble." Amy saw her fiancé's suffering. He became nervous and irritable. More and more, he tried to convince her to be more discreet. "Amy, why do we need fireworks worth $500,000? We could spend that money on something else." "That money," she interrupted, "we're saving it so you can later give it to your mum to buy new shoes. No, Robert, there will be fireworks and everything else. My uncle wants it that way." She was playing her part, although she felt sick inside. The relationship that was just beginning was already being seriously tested. Robert couldn't stand it. He grew more and more distant, increasingly taking his parents' side. Amy understood with bitterness that she wasn't marrying a strong man, but an obedient son who was afraid to go against his authoritarian parents' will. Her uncle saw everything. "Hold on, my niece," he would tell her during their brief meetings. "Soon the masks will fall. The important thing is that you behave with dignity. You are the host of this party, and remember, you are not at fault for anything in front of them." She tried her best, maintaining her dignity, responding with polite but cold indifference to her mother-in-law's attacks and her fiancé's doubts. But anxiety grew inside her. She didn't know what her uncle was planning, but she sensed that the wedding day would be not only a celebration, but a moment of truth. And that truth could be too cruel for everyone. A month before the wedding, Selina decided to deliver a new blow. She called Robert and told him that she and her father, as people of status, could not allow their future relatives to look like commoners at the wedding. Therefore, she insisted on a joint shopping trip to personally supervise the outfits for Amy and her uncle. "We have to make sure they don't embarrass the Brown name," she said coldly to her son. Robert, as always, did not dare to contradict her. He passed the kind offer to Amy, presenting it as a gesture of goodwill. "Mum just wants to help improve the relationship. She understands fashion. She'll help you and your uncle choose something that's really worthwhile." Amy understood that this was another attempt at humiliation, but remembering her uncle's advice, she accepted. Marcus, upon hearing the news on the phone, just laughed. "Perfect. Let her have her fun. Support her, Amy. It'll be amusing." They met at the most expensive boutique in the city. Selina arrived accompanied by a friend, another pretentious socialite, and immediately took control. With disdain, she rejected all the dresses Amy liked and brought out the ugliest and cheapest models. "Here, Amy, try this one on." She handed her a dress in an acidic green with enormous frills. "It's very refreshing, and the price is reasonable. There's no need for your uncle to sell his last pants for your dress." Her friend guffawed behind her. Amy patiently tried on everything they offered, coming out of the dressing room with an impassive face. The salespeople, seeing the spectacle, could barely contain their laughter. When that painful show finally ended, and Selina, satisfied with having humiliated the future bride enough, was about to leave, Amy's uncle walked in. He was dressed simply but elegantly in a cashmere coat and expensive shoes. "Good afternoon," he said, greeting Selina with a gesture. "Sorry for the delay, I had some matters to attend to." "Amy, have you chosen something?" "Not yet, Uncle Marcus. Selina is kindly helping me," Amy replied calmly. He looked disapprovingly at the green monster she was holding and said dryly, "I see. Well, Selina, thank you for the help, but I'm afraid my niece has a slightly different taste." He called the store manager. "Please show us your exclusive collection. Has the dress we ordered from Italy arrived yet?" The manager, who had previously looked suspiciously at the group, smiled broadly. "Yes, Mr. Wright, of course. It's waiting in the VIP dressing room. This way, please." Selina and her friend were left speechless. 10 minutes later, Amy appeared before them in a breathtaking dress, with handmade lace, pearl embroidery, a cut that accentuated her slender figure, and a long train. It was a princess dress. "Perfect," her uncle declared. "Wrap it up and get the matching shoes and accessories." He took a platinum bank card from his pocket and handed it to the manager. Selina watched what was happening, and a whole range of feelings were reflected on her face, from shock and disbelief to open rage. Her plan to humiliate the commoner had failed miserably. The uncle, the foreman, was not as simple as he seemed. This event was a catalyst. The Browns understood that they had underestimated Amy's family, but instead of showing respect, they only became more suspicious. Now they were convinced that Amy's uncle was not just a debtor, but a major swindler, or even a criminal authority. The pressure on Robert reached its limit. His father questioned him every night. "Do you understand that he's laundering dirty money through your wedding?" Charles shouted. "As soon as you get married, all his debts could fall on you, on our family. You're going to bring shame to the Brown name." His mother seconded him, crying inconsolably. "Son, think it over before it's too late. Cancel the wedding. That girl is a walking disaster. She'll drag you down with her." Robert was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He arrived at Amy's apartment late at night, pale and nervous. "I can't take it any more," he said as soon as he entered. "My parents are against our wedding. They think your uncle is a criminal. You have to explain everything to me. Where does he get all that money?" Amy looked at her fiancé, and her heart tightened with compassion and disappointment. He was so scared, so dependent on his parents' opinion, that not a single ounce of the confidence that had once captivated her remained. "Robert, I already told you, my uncle is an honest businessman, and he is doing all this because he loves me," she replied firmly. "If you don't believe me, if your parents' opinion is more important than our future, then maybe we shouldn't get married." It was a bluff. The thought of cancelling the wedding terrified her, but she understood that she had to be firm. "Are you threatening me?" he whispered it. "I'm giving you a choice," she said, looking him in the eyes. "Either you trust me and we go on together until the end, or you listen to your parents and we end it right now." He was silent for a long time, looking at the floor. Amy saw the internal struggle in his soul. Finally, he lifted his head. "Okay, I'm with you. But if we have problems because of your uncle after the wedding, I won't forgive you." He had made his decision, but it wasn't the decision of a strong man. It was the decision of someone who fears losing a beautiful toy, a luxury wedding that the whole city was already talking about. Amy understood this but remained silent. She decided to go on, no matter the cost. She still didn't know that the real price of that choice would be paid on the wedding day, and not with money, but with a broken heart and trampled dignity. The last weeks before the wedding turned into a cold war. The Browns, realizing that they couldn't dissuade their son, changed tactics. They stopped openly opposing it, but their passive aggression became almost unbearable. Selina called Amy every day under the guise of discussing details and exhausted her with her criticism. "Amy, I saw the menu you approved. Foie gras, bluefin tuna. Are you sure? It's so vulgar. In decent homes, they prefer simpler, more exquisite food. For example, citronella gelatin." "Selina, the menu is already agreed upon and paid for," Amy replied patiently. "Oh, paid for," the mother-in-law replied. "Of course, when it's someone else's money, it's easy to spend it on any nonsense." Charles, for his part, began to investigate everyone involved in the wedding preparations. He called the agency, the restaurant, the florists, and pretending to be the groom's father, tried to find out the details of the contracts and payment terms. He was clearly looking for a mistake, for proof that it was all a big financial scam. Robert was between a rock and a hard place. At home, he was quiet, pretending that nothing was happening, but Amy saw his tension and how he avoided looking at her. He had stopped giving her compliments, stopped hugging her at night. Their closeness, both physical and emotional, was fading before her eyes. They lived in the same apartment like neighbours, united only by a common goal, though a very different one for each of them, to survive until the wedding day. Amy found support only in her conversations with her uncle. "They're testing you, my niece," he would tell her. "They want to see how much you can take. Don't give in. Be superior to it. Soon everything will be over." "Uncle Marcus, I'm so tired," she complained. "I'm not sure I want this wedding. I'm not sure I want to marry someone who can't protect me." "The decision is always yours, Amy, but I think you should see this through to the end, if only to find out who is who." And she decided to go on. She drew strength from her work, where she was valued and respected, and from the hope that soon she would be able to put on her beautiful wedding dress. It hung in a special bag in her closet, a symbol of an unfulfilled dream that was about to become reality. A week before the celebration, the Browns organised a farewell dinner for their own circle. They invited their closest friends, as rich and arrogant as they were, and Amy with Robert. Her uncle was deliberately not invited. "This is a night for the real family," Selina said in passing. Throughout the evening, Amy was the centre of attention. The Browns' guests looked at her like a strange creature. They asked her impertinent questions about her origins, about her uncle, and about how she had managed to win over such a coveted fiancé. Amy answered with discretion and dignity, but inside, everything was boiling. The culmination of the night was Charles's toast. He raised his glass and, looking at Amy, said, "I want to toast to initiative. In our difficult times, knowing how to find the right sponsor is a great talent. Some invest in stocks, others in real estate, and some—" He paused, sweeping a penetrating gaze over the guests. "Invest in a fortunate marriage. It's the riskiest asset, but also the most profitable. Let's toast to the brave investors." Everyone laughed. Robert was also sitting next to his father and laughing, looking at Amy. And in that moment, Amy understood that her uncle was right. This was not just a test, it was a public display of humiliation. They wanted to break her, to make her feel insignificant before she officially became part of their family. She quietly stood up from the table. "Excuse me, I don't feel well," she said, and without looking at anyone, she walked out and headed for the exit. Robert caught up with her in the lobby. "Where are you going? Are you angry? Dad was just joking." "Your dad finds it very amusing," she replied coldly as she put on her coat. "And you, it seems, do too, Robert." "Amelia, stop. You're ruining the night for everyone." "I'm ruining the night?" She turned and looked him in the eyes. "Robert, your father just publicly called me a kept woman and a fraud, and you were sitting there laughing. After that, you want me to go back to the table and pretend everything is fine." "But he didn't mean that." "That's exactly what he meant, and you understood it perfectly." She called a taxi and left, leaving him standing there, bewildered. All the way home, she didn't cry. There were no tears left, only a cold, empty ringing inside, and a single thought. What am I doing? Why am I marrying this man? She got home and stayed in the dark for a long time. She was about to call her uncle and cancel everything, but then she remembered her dress, her dream, and decided that she would not let them take it from her. The wedding would happen, but it would no longer be her party. It would be her battlefield, and she wasn't going to lose. The next day, Robert arrived with a huge bouquet of flowers and apologies. He said he had been wrong, that his father had gone too far, that he loved her more than his life. Amy accepted the apology but did not forgive. She looked at him and didn't see the man she loved but a stranger, a weak person, a puppet in the hands of his parents. The tension reached its peak. She knew that they were preparing something more for her at the wedding, something that was meant to break her definitively. And she was preparing for it, gathering all her willpower. She was no longer afraid. She was waiting. 3 days before the wedding, when it seemed that all the main preparations were finished, Selina found a new way to ruin Amy's mood. She called and declared that they, as the groom's parents, had to give the bride a traditional gift, a piece of jewellery, and of course they had to choose it together. "Amy, we'll meet tomorrow at noon at the Estevez jewellery store," she purred over the phone. "Don't be late. Charles is a very busy man. He's reserved exactly 1 hour for this." Amy understood that it was another trap. After what happened with the dress, she knew what to expect, but to refuse meant giving them a new reason to accuse her of disrespect. She accepted, mentally preparing for a new round of humiliation. The Estevez jewellery store was the most expensive and ostentatious in the city. Amy arrived a little before the appointed time. The Browns arrived precisely at noon, with the attitude of royalty descending to mingle with mere mortals. "Well, show us what you like," Selina said from the doorway, addressing Amy but looking at the salesperson. Amy was perplexed. She didn't know what to say. "I haven't chosen anything. I thought it was your gift." "The gift is ours, of course, but we want you to like it." The mother-in-law smiled falsely. Then she lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Keep in mind that our budget is limited. We can't spend a fortune on you." It was a blatant lie. The Browns could buy that entire store without batting an eye. Amy, trying to keep her composure, approached one of the display cases. A delicate white gold necklace with small sapphires caught her eye. "This one is very pretty," she said softly. Selina came over, took a quick look at the necklace, and immediately made a face. "Sapphires, darling. That's a stone for mature women. You need something simpler, something befitting your status." With an authoritative gesture, she called the consultant. "Miss, show us something economical for a young bride. Do you have anything with cubic zirconia?" The young consultant blushed with discomfort. She clearly understood what was happening. "We have a lovely collection with semi-precious stones." "Exactly. Bring it over," Selina interrupted with a wave of her hand. The next 30 minutes were torture. The mother-in-law forced Amy to try on the cheapest and most ostentatious jewellery. Huge earrings with amethysts, thin chains with cubic zirconia, rings that looked like children's costume jewellery. Charles stood to the side with his arms crossed over his chest, watching the spectacle with evident delight. "Look how cute," Selina exclaimed when Amy put on another one of those atrocities. "Simple and tasteful, and most importantly, inexpensive. Just right for you." Amy silently looked at her reflection in the mirror. She didn't see a jewel. She saw the brand the Browns were trying to impose on her. Cheap, vulgar, inferior. When her patience was at its limit, she took off another pair of earrings and said calmly, "Thank you, Selina, for your concern, but I'm not going to wear any of this." "What do you mean you're not going to wear it?" the mother-in-law exclaimed. "I'm making an effort for you. I'm wasting my time." "I appreciate it, but I have family jewellery. I'll wear that." "What family jewellery?" Selina snorted with contempt. "Your grandmother's silver rings." "Something like that," Amy replied calmly. "Excuse me, but I have to go. I have a meeting with the decorator." She turned and headed for the exit, leaving the Browns completely bewildered. She felt their hateful gazes on her back, but didn't look back. Walking out onto the street, she took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling. She knew she had just burned the last bridges. Now they not only didn't want her, they hated her. That night, as she expected, Robert showed up. He was furious. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, pacing the room. "You humiliated my parents. They wanted to give you a gift and you acted like a brat." "I humiliated them," Amy calmly replied. She was sitting in an armchair and looking at him as if she was seeing him for the first time. "Robert, your mother forced me to try on cheap trinkets for half an hour, publicly demonstrating that I don't deserve anything better, and you call that a gift?" "She just wanted to help you choose. She has good taste." "She doesn't have good taste. She has a desire to trample on me. And your father was enjoying the spectacle. And you didn't even try to defend me. You believed them again, not me." He stopped and looked at her desperately. "Amy, what do you want from me? They are my parents. I can't go against them." "You can," she said in a low voice, "if you love me. But apparently you don't. You love their approval, their money, that comfortable world they created for you, and I don't fit into that world." "That's not true." He came closer, knelt in front of her armchair, and took her hands. "I love you. I really do. Just hang in there a little longer. Everything will change after the wedding. They'll get used to you. They'll see how wonderful you are, and everything will get better." He looked at her with pleading eyes, and for a moment her heart wavered as maybe he really believed what he was saying. Maybe she should give him another chance. But then she remembered his mother's disdainful smile, his father's cold gaze, his own laughter during the humiliating toast, and she understood. Nothing will change. It will only get worse. They will never accept her, and he will never take her side. She gently pulled her hands away. "Okay, Robert, I'll hang in there. There are 3 days left until the wedding." He interpreted this as consent and sighed with relief. He didn't understand that it wasn't a promise, it was a sentence. She would hang in there until the wedding, and at the wedding, she would put an end to it once and for all. The wedding day greeted Boston with bright sunshine, a rarity for September in the US. Amy woke up with a strange feeling, an almost ringing silence of tranquility. She had spent the night in the city's best hotel in a luxurious suite that her uncle had rented for her. She slept alone. Robert, according to a tradition that his mother had improvised in a hurry, was supposed to pick her up from the hotel in the morning. The stylists and makeup artists worked on her for hours. When Amy looked in the mirror, she saw a beautiful, unfamiliar woman, a perfect hairstyle, impeccable makeup, and that magical dress that fit her like a second skin. She was ready not for a party, but for a battle. Robert came for her, entered the room with a huge bouquet of white roses, and stood frozen in the doorway, stunned by her beauty. "Amelia, you are incredible," he whispered. A moment of sincere admiration shone in his eyes, and Amy's heart trembled for a fraction of a second, but she immediately remembered everything that had happened, and her gaze became cold again. The ceremony at Emerald Grove was truly magnificent. There were about 200 guests. Everything was submerged in flowers and crystal, with music, exquisite food, and impeccable service. The Browns arrived among the first and immediately began to act as if they were the organisers and main sponsors of the party. Selena, in a loud, expensive dress that, she thought, made her the star of the night, went from table to table accepting congratulations and compliments. Charles held important conversations with his business partners, whom he had invited without consulting the young couple. Uncle Marcus stayed in the shadows. He sat at a table with some of his friends, modestly but very confidently dressed, and smiled, watching everything that was happening. He approached Amy only once when she was on the terrace, breathing in the fresh forest air. "Ready, my niece?" he asked in a low voice. "Ready," she nodded. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." The civil ceremony passed in a blur. Amy spoke her vows mechanically, not looking at Robert but through him. She felt like an actress in a well-rehearsed play whose ending had already been decided. The banquet began with toasts. The first, of course, was Charles. He spoke at length and pompously about family values, the Brown dynasty, and how important it is to make the right choice in life. There wasn't a single warm word for Amy in his speech, only insinuations that his son was doing her a great honour by taking her as his wife. Then came the congratulations from friends and colleagues. Amy smiled, received gifts, but felt detached from the joy. She was waiting. She knew that the mother-in-law's main gift was yet to come, and it came. When the huge multi-tiered wedding cake, a true masterpiece of confectionery, was brought out, the host handed the microphone to Selena for the final toast before the dessert. She stood up, gracefully adjusted her diamond necklace, and swept her gaze around the room, seeing all the poor people. Robert immediately took out his phone to record his mother's triumph on video. "Dear guests," she began in a clear, well-modulated voice. "Today we all have a great celebration. My son, my pride, has finally started his family. My husband and I have waited a long time for this day, and of course, we were very concerned about the choice he would make. She paused, looking directly at Amy. Life is a curious thing. Sometimes it brings people from totally different worlds together, people who apparently have nothing in common, neither education, social position, nor financial status. But as they say, love is blind, and today we see the result of that unexpected love. A contained laugh rippled through the room. Amy sat with her back straight, staring at her mother-in-law. I want to wish our Amy, Selina continued, her voice dripping with poison, a lot of patience. She will have to learn many things. She will have to learn to live up to the Brown name, to be grateful for the opportunity she has been given, because not every girl from a simple family gets to win such a lucky ticket. She raised her glass. So let's toast so that this victory doesn't go to her head. Bitter! The guests shouted in confusion. Bitter! Robert, laughing, leaned in to kiss Amy, but she pulled away. The host, trying to ease the tension, announced loudly, "And now the wedding cake, bride and groom, your first cut together." They were given a knife with a silver handle. Robert took Amy's hand, and together they made the cut. The first slice, by tradition, was for the parents, but Selina resolutely pushed away the plate that was offered to her. "No, no," she said loudly so everyone could hear. "The first slice should be eaten by the bride. She's the hungriest today." She took the plate with the cake and approached Amy, who was still standing by the table. "You know, Amy, I've calculated that this cake costs what your builder uncle makes in a month, and you haven't spent a single cent on this party, or the dress, or the flowers, or the food. You're here like a queen at others' expense." Amy remained silent. She felt all eyes on them. "So it's not fair for you to be hungry. This beggar didn't even contribute anything for the cake," Selina suddenly screamed, and her face contorted with rage. "Eat, vagrant!" With those words, she took a piece of cake with her hand and forcibly smashed it into Amy's face. A deathly silence reigned in the hall. The only sound was the sticky cream falling to the floor from Amy's hair and dress. And in that silence, a laugh was clearly heard. It was Robert, her husband, who with his phone in hand was laughing heartily while recording his wife's humiliation. His friends joined in the laughter. Amy remained motionless. She didn't cry. She simply looked at her husband, at his laughing face. And in that moment, all the love that was still left in her soul died completely and forever. For a moment, the world for Amy narrowed to a single point. The screen of Robert's phone, where she saw her reflection, a bewildered face with smeared cake on her cheek, a pink marzipan rose, drops of cream on her eyelashes, and behind that reflection, laughter. The laughter of her husband, his friends, the triumphant hiss and smile of her mother-in-law. Time seemed to slow down, turning into a thick, sticky jelly. She didn't remember how she turned and walked out of the hall. She walked as if in a dream, not noticing the stunned faces of the guests, not hearing the embarrassed murmur of the host trying to save the situation. She simply walked, leaving sticky cream stains on the expensive carpet behind her. She looked for the sign that said dressing room, a small room intended for the newlyweds to touch up their makeup or change. She entered, locked the door, and only then allowed herself to breathe. She leaned her back against the cold door and slowly slid to the floor. There were no tears, only a muffled, deafening, paralyzing sob. She sat on the floor among scattered gift boxes and stared at a single point. In her mind, there was an absolute emptiness, as if someone had pressed a button, and all her feelings, thoughts, and emotions had been disconnected. She stayed like that for probably 10 minutes. Then she slowly got up and approached a large gold-framed mirror. A monster looked back at her from the mirror, a ruined dress that had cost a fortune, cake smeared on her face mixed with expensive makeup, and empty, lifeless eyes, of a person who had just had everything taken away. Love, hope, dignity. She mechanically took a napkin and tried to clean her face, but the cream only smeared more, leaving greasy pink stains. She looked at her hands. They were also covered in sticky cream. She felt a wave of nausea, and then she broke down. It wasn't crying, it was a convulsive, silent scream that came from the depths of her soul. She doubled over, choking from a pain that was not physical, but much, much more terrible. The pain of betrayal. He not only didn't protect her, but enjoyed her humiliation. He laughed. That laughter would now sound forever in her ears. She writhed in silent hysteria, unable to stop. All her life, all her dreams of a happy family with that man collapsed in an instant. She remembered his beautiful words of love, his tender caresses, his promise to always be by her side. All of it was a lie, a falsehood, a facade behind which was hiding a cowardly, weak puppet, completely subservient to his cruel and dominant mother. She cried for her naivete. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the obvious? All those signs, all those humiliations that she attributed to her mother-in-law's difficult character and Robert's kindness. She herself had allowed the situation to reach that point. She, with her patience and forgiveness, had given them a weapon to use against her. Someone knocked gently on the door. "Amy, my child, open up, it's me," her uncle's voice said. She didn't want to see anyone. She wanted to be left alone. "Go away," she whispered with difficulty. "Amy, please, open up. We need to talk." Reluctantly, she got up from the floor, went to the door, and turned the key. Her uncle came in and closed the door silently. He didn't look at her face or her dress. He looked directly into her eyes. "Well, have you cried enough?" he asked in a low voice. She nodded in silence. "Now wash your face and listen to me carefully." He spoke calmly, but his voice had such strength that Amy obeyed without question. She entered a small bathroom next to the makeup room, turned on the water and washed off the remnants of the cake and her humiliation for a long time. The cold water soothed her a little. When she came back, her uncle was sitting in an armchair. He continued to look at her calmly. "And what's going to happen now?" she asked, and her voice sounded flat and lifeless. "Now," he said, emphasizing each word, "you are going to go back to that ballroom and you are going to finish this night, but on your own terms." "I can't," she whispered. "I can't face them." "You can," he replied firmly. "Not only can you, you must do it for yourself, for your parents, whom they humiliated through you, and for me." He stood up and approached her. "Amy, I didn't raise you to let people trample all over you. Your parents were wonderful, strong, proud people. And you are their daughter. Their blood and mine run in your veins. And the rights," he smiled, "never give up." He was silent for a moment and then added, "They think they won, that they broke you. They expect you to go away crying so they can celebrate their victory. Don't give them that pleasure." His words, his calm and confidence began to take effect. The shock was dissipating, and in its place, another feeling arose, cold and sharp, like a shard of ice. It was rage. "What should I do?" she asked, and there was no longer any weakness in her voice. "Just be yourself, Amy," he smiled, "and I'll be by your side." He also took an immaculate white handkerchief from his pocket. "Dry your tears. You'll never cry over them again." He handed her the handkerchief. Amy took it and wiped her eyes. She looked at herself in the mirror, her dress ruined, her face tear-stained, but her gaze had changed. There was no longer fear or pain, there was steel, she was ready. Amy looked at herself and a cold fire burned in the depths of her pupils. The woman into the mirror was no longer the naive, frightened girl who half an hour ago was ready to sink into shame. She was a different Amy, an Amy who had understood the depth of the betrayal and was ready to respond. "Help me with the dress," she said to her uncle. "We have to fix it somehow." Together they tried to clean the sticky cream from the delicate lace. They couldn't get all the stains out, but they did what they could. Amy fixed her hair and reapplied her lipstick. Every one of her gestures was now precise and confident. The nervousness and trembling had disappeared. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" her uncle asked, watching her intently. "We can leave right now." "No," she replied firmly. "You're right. I'm not going to give them that pleasure. This night is not over." When they left the dressing room and headed back to the hall, Amy felt her heart beating with a strong, steady rhythm in her chest. There was no fear, only an icy calm and a clear conviction of what she had to do. Her return had the effect of an exploding bomb. The music stopped immediately. All conversations ceased. Hundreds of eyes fell upon her. She walked through the hall with her head held high, ignoring the whispers and surprised looks. The cake stains on her dress were visible to everyone and were not a sign of shame, but a mark of battle. The Browns were sitting at the main table. Selina, seeing her, smiled triumphantly. She clearly hadn't expected her to come back and apparently thought Amy was coming to beg for forgiveness. Charles looked at her with a disdainful smile, and Robert looked away. He couldn't look his wife in the eyes. Amy, without a word, approached the hosts on table and took the microphone from his hands. "A moment of your attention, please," she said, and her voice, amplified by the speakers, sounded surprisingly clear and strong. The host looked at her in confusion and then at her uncle, who stood behind her like a silent guardian, and decided not to intervene. "I see the party is in full swing," Amy continued, sweeping a cold gaze around the room. "I hope you all enjoyed the little show my mother-in-law organised. It was very creative." She paused to let her words sink in. The smile vanished from Selina's face. She realised that something was not going according to her script. "Usually at the end of the night, we thank those who helped organise the celebration. I'd like to break with that tradition and do it now because I'm afraid that later some of those present may lose the desire to give thanks." She turned towards the Browns' table. "I want to thank Charles and Selina for their invaluable moral support and for making their position clear from the beginning without spending a single cent on our wedding. Very illustrative." Charles turned red. Selina gripped the tablecloth tightly. "I also want to thank my husband," she said the word with barely perceptible irony. "Thank you, Robert, for your protection and support. I will never forget your laughter when your mother threw the cake in my face. It was the most valuable wedding gift." Robert sank into his chair. He was pale as a ghost. His friends who had recently been laughing with him were now staring at their plates. Amy turned her gaze to her uncle, and for the first time that night, her voice became warm. "I want to thank the only person who is truly close to me, the person who replaced my parents, who raised me, and who did everything so that I could have this party today." She approached her uncle and hugged him. "Thank you, Uncle Marcus, for everything, for your love, your support, and for this beautiful wedding." She pulled away and took the microphone again. She looked directly into Charles's eyes, which seemed about to explode with rage. "You know, Charles, my uncle is a very modest person. He asked me to introduce him as the owner of a small construction company called Wright Construction. And it's true, he has that company for his soul, so to speak." She paused again, enjoying the complete silence in the room. All the guests, holding their breath, waited for what would come next. "But today I think I can break that modesty because I want everyone to know what a wonderful uncle I have, and I want my new relatives," she looked at the Browns again, "to understand it too." She took a deep breath, gathering strength for the final blow. She saw fear in Robert's eyes, rage in his father's, and confusion on her mother-in-law's face. They still didn't understand what was happening, but they already felt the ground sinking beneath their feet. The internal breakdown that Amy had suffered in the dressing room now had to materialize in words that would change everything, and she was ready to say them. Amy tightened her grip on the microphone. Her voice was absolutely calm, but that silent calm was more terrifying than any scream. She looked at the Brown family, and in her gaze there was no hate or resentment, only a cold, distant contempt, like that for insects under glass. "Well," she continued, and each word fell into the resonant silence of the hall like a heavy drop. "I want to express my gratitude not only to my uncle Marcus Wright, but to his entire team, the team of the huge media and investment holding company, Horizon Media and Investments. of which he is the owner and founder. She pronounced the name of the holding slowly, with emphasis. The first reaction in the hall was bewilderment. Most of the guests didn't understand what she was talking about, but Amy saw how Charles's face changed. He flinched as if he had been struck, and his crimson colour began to turn deathly pale. Unlike the others, he knew that name perfectly. Yes, you didn't hear wrong. Amy allowed herself a slight poisonous smile. The same holding company that last month began a process, as they say now, of fusion and acquisition with a very well-known construction company in our city called Straran. Now everyone understood. A murmur swept through the hall like a disturbed beehive. Charles's business partners, sitting at one of the tables, were whispering excitedly. They were aware of this major operation that had been the main news in the city's business circles for weeks. But no one knew the name of the mysterious investor who was absorbing the Brown Empire. I only recently learned of this pleasant coincidence, Amy continued, without taking her eyes off her father-in-law's petrified face. And I very much hope that our union today, so to speak, will help a future, productive, and above all, honest collaboration between our families. After all, we are now one big united family, aren't we? She swept her gaze over the Browns' table. Charles was sitting, gripping the armrests of his chair, breathing with difficulty. He was not looking at Amy, but at her uncle, who remained impassive behind her. In that look there was horror, the horror of a businessman who had just made the most fatal mistake of his life. Not only had he insulted his son's fiancée, but he had offended the niece of the man who now held his business, his reputation, everything he had built for years, in his hands. Selina, who at first didn't understand anything, looked at her husband. "Charles, what is she saying?" she stammered. Charles didn't answer. He was paralysed by the magnitude of what had happened, and then something happened that Amy didn't expect. Selina, the Iron Lady, the Queen of Snobbery, let out a soft moan, rolled her eyes, and slowly, as if she had been knocked down, began to fall to the floor. She fainted. Chaos erupted in the hall. Someone jumped up. Someone shouted, "A doctor!" Robert, who until then had been frozen, finally reacted and ran to his mother. Mum, what's wrong?" Amy remained standing with the microphone in her hand, watching the scene with cold calm. She felt neither compassion nor triumph, only a sense of justice restored. Uncle Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go, Amy," he said. "You have nothing more to do here." He took her hand and led her toward the exit. The guests parted before them like waves before an icebreaker. No one dared to say a word to them. They looked at Amy with a new mixture of fear and admiration. At the exit, Robert caught up with her. His face was white with terror. "Amy, wait!" He grabbed her hand. Is it true? Your uncle, he—" Amy slowly pulled her hand away. "Yes, Robert, it's true. But why didn't you say anything? Would you have believed me?" She looked him in the eyes and he looked away. "Would you have believed a beggar and a fraud, or your mum and dad?" He didn't know how to answer. "Amy, forgive me," Robert mumbled. "I didn't know." "Now you do," she replied firmly. "And you know what, Robert? I also want to thank you." "For what?" He didn't understand. "Because today you showed me your true face and that of your family. You saved me years of life that I could have wasted on illusions. Thank you, and goodbye." She turned and headed for the exit, where her uncle was already waiting with her coat draped over his arm. Robert remained standing in the middle of the hall while people fussed around his mother. She was already coming to and was now crying loudly. He watched Amy walk away and, for the first time in his life, seemed to understand what he had lost. And it wasn't her uncle's money. He had lost the woman who could have truly loved him. But he, with his own hands, with his laughter, with his betrayal, had destroyed that love. His decisive response came too late, forever. Amy and her uncle left the restaurant into the cool September night. She breathed in the fresh air deeply, and it seemed to her that she hadn't truly breathed for many months. Her uncle silently placed the coat over her shoulders and opened the door of his black car that was waiting for them at the entrance. They drove through the city in complete silence. Amy looked at the passing lights outside the window and tried to process everything that had happened. The wedding, which should have been the happiest day of her life, had become a battlefield from which she had emerged victorious. But that victory was bitter. "How are you?" her uncle finally asked, without taking his eyes off the road. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "Empty." "That will pass," he said. "The important thing is that you got out of that swamp. They would have devoured you, Amy, sooner or later." "I loved him, Uncle Marcus." "I know, but love should never be about humiliation." They arrived at her uncle's house. "You'll live with me for now," he said. "Don't go back to your apartment. You don't know what they're capable of when they're on the edge. Do you think they'll seek revenge?" "I think they'll try to get everything back," her uncle smiled. "Charles is in a panic. His business, his creation, now depends on the decision of a man whose family he just trampled in the mud. He's going to crawl on his knees so I don't cancel the deal, and you'll cancel it." "We'll see," her uncle replied evasively. "It depends on his behavior and your decision." The next day, as her uncle had predicted, the calls began. The first was from Charles. He spoke with Marcus. Amy was in the next room and heard fragments of the conversation. Her uncle spoke calmly and coldly, not letting the caller get a word in. The call ended when her uncle said, "All questions are for my niece. She was the one who was offended. She will decide what we do." Then Robert called. He called Amy. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. "Amy, I beg you to meet with me." His voice was full of despair. "I have to talk to you. Dad is crazy. Mum is on tranquilizers. Everything is falling apart." "Everything has already fallen apart, Robert," she replied calmly. "I understand everything. I was wrong. I was an idiot. But I love you. Give me a chance to fix everything." "Fix it?" Amy smiled bitterly. "And what do you want to fix? Get your laughter back? Erase from my memory your mother's face with the cake in her hand? That's impossible, Robert." "But we can start over. I'll talk to my parents. They'll apologize." "I don't need their apologies. I don't need anything from you anymore. I'm going to file for divorce." She hung up without letting him respond. She knew that if she continued the conversation, he would again appeal to her pity, and she might waver. And she didn't want to be weak ever again. The divorce was finalized in record time. The Browns didn't dare to object. They didn't even show up in court. They sent their lawyers. Amy regained her maiden name right, and it was like a breath of fresh air. She was herself again. Charles tried several times to meet with her. He sent expensive gifts through lawyers, offered money. Amy returned everything. She didn't need their charity. She only wanted one thing, for them to disappear from her life forever. The company merger was finally completed. Her uncle decided not to destroy the Brown business completely. "He's a good builder," he explained to Amy. "He's just a rotten person. Let him work, but now he'll work for us and he'll know his place." Charles lost the majority stake and became a simple hired executive in his own former company. For him, that was worse than bankruptcy. Selina, having lost the status of a lady of the house, stopped appearing in society. It was rumoured that she had become a recluse and hardly ever left her huge but now empty home. The conflict was resolved. Justice, as her uncle understood it, had triumphed. The Browns were punished not with prison and ruin, but with what they feared most, the loss of status and power. They got what they deserved. Amy gained her freedom. She got out of that toxic and humiliating relationship, paying a high price but keeping the most important thing, herself. She was no longer a bride from a simple family. She was Amy Wright, and her future depended only on her. A year passed. Amy's life changed radically. Following her uncle's advice, she took specialized courses in Milan and now headed a new division in his holding company, elite landscape design for large corporate clients. She worked a lot, traveled, and met interesting people. There was no trace left of the shy and insecure girl she once was. She had become a young, elegant, and confident woman who knew exactly what she wanted from life. She sold the apartment her uncle had once given her and bought a spacious one with panoramic windows in the city centre. She designed her new home herself, which reflected her inner world, bright, free, full of air and greenery. She hardly ever remembered the Browns. Sometimes echoes of their lives reached her. Charles continued to work at the company under her uncle's direction. They said he had declined a lot, aged, and gone from being the feared owner of the city to a quiet administrative employee. Robert, after the divorce, didn't last long at his father's company. He couldn't stand his colleagues' mocking glances and quit. According to rumours, he moved to Boston. He tried to start some business of his own, but apparently without success. One day, while sitting in a cafe with a friend, Amy accidentally saw Selina in a fashion magazine. She was in the Social Chronicle section in a photo from a charity auction. Selina looked aged. On her face was a mask of mournful courtesy, and in her eyes was the same emptiness that Amy had seen in her own home. The caption read, "Selina Brown, a well-known patron, continues the work of her late husband." Amy was surprised to learn that Charles had died 3 months earlier of a heart attack. She felt nothing, neither pity nor triumph. That man was part of a past she had left behind. In her personal life too, everything was going well. She had started dating an architect from the department next to hers. He was her age, intelligent, talented, with a great sense of humour. And most importantly, he saw her as a person. He valued her opinion and respected her work. He knew nothing of her past, and she was in no hurry to tell him. She wanted to build a new relationship on a blank page. One evening, while they were walking along the promenade, he stopped, took her hands, and, looking into her eyes, said, "Amy, I want you to know that I have never met a woman like you. You are whole, strong, and at the same time, tender. I love you." She looked at him, and tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks. She understood that she had completed her journey. She had emerged from the fire of humiliation and betrayal, not broken, but on the contrary, strengthened. She remembered that terrible day, her ruined wedding, and understood that she was grateful for it. Grateful because it showed her what love should not be. Grateful because it made her find a strength within herself that she didn't even know she had. She hugged the man she loved and whispered, "I love you too." Her inner victory was complete. She had not only regained her freedom and independence, but also a new, true love built on equality and respect. She understood that her happiness never depended on status or money. It was always within her, in her strength, in her dignity, in her ability to remain true to herself no matter what. She was the daughter of her parents, her uncle's niece. She was Amy Wright, and that was more than enough. If this story of strength of spirit and knowing how to stand up for yourself resonated with your soul, don't forget to like and subscribe, because each of us deserves to be valued and respected. And sometimes you have to fight for that right.